The sound of the car door slamming shut was the last thing I heard before seeing the taillights fade into the darkness. I stood on that unfamiliar corner, my legs trembling, and my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. There was a haze in the air, and the night cold cut me to the bone. I didn't have my purse, I had no money, I didn't have my phone. I only had the sweater I was wearing, and the certainty that my daughter-in-law had just dumped me there as if I were trash on the street. Brenda didn't even turn to look at me when I got out of the car. Not a single glance, not another word after all the things she had yelled at me on the way. She just sped up and vanished into the night. And I was left there, in the middle of a neighborhood I had never seen, surrounded by empty streets and buildings with broken windows. The silence was heavy, interrupted only by the distant barking of a stray dog and the dull thud of music coming from a bar at the end of the block. I looked around, searching for something familiar, any landmark that would tell me where I was or how to get back home. But there was nothing. Only long shadows under the yellowish glow of the streetlights and the smell of dampness and piled-up garbage. I felt the tears beginning to sting my eyes, but I held them back. I wasn't going to cry out here, exposed, vulnerable. Not yet. How had I come to this? How had I allowed my life to turn into this silent nightmare where my own family treated me worse than a stranger? The question hit me so hard that I had to lean against the wall of a building to keep from falling over. My hands were shaking. My legs barely held me up. And in that moment, standing there in the darkness, I felt something I had never felt with such clarity before. I was completely alone in the world. I thought about my son, Paul, my only son, the boy I raised alone after his father left us. The boy I worked 2 jobs for years so he could study, so he could have clean clothes and a hot meal on the table. The boy I hugged every night and promised I would always be there for him, no matter what happened. That boy had turned into a man who allowed his wife to treat me like a nuisance. A man who no longer defended me. A man who had stopped seeing me. Tonight's argument had started over something so small it now seemed absurd. We were in the car, coming back from a family dinner where I had spent most of the time quiet, smiling when I should smile, nodding when I should nod. Brenda was driving, and Paul was in the passenger seat, checking his phone. I was in the back, as always, like unwanted luggage that had to be carried. I made the mistake of suggesting she take another route, because that street always had a lot of traffic. That was all I said. A simple suggestion, without malice, no intention to annoy. But Brenda exploded. She turned around with those eyes full of contempt that were now so familiar to me, and told me she was fed up with my comments, with my presence, with having to tolerate me in her life. That I was nothing more than a burden they dragged along out of obligation. That if it were up to her, I would have been in a retirement home years ago. Paul didn't say anything. He kept looking at his phone as if the conversation wasn't happening. As if his wife wasn't tearing me apart with every sentence. As if I wasn't there, sitting inches from him, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. I tried to respond, to defend my right to exist in this family I had built with my own hands. But Brenda wouldn't let me speak. She interrupted me over and over, launching each insult with calculated precision, aiming exactly where it would hurt the most. Then she stopped the car on that dark corner and told me to get out, just like that. She ordered me out of her car, out of her life, out of her sight. And when I hesitated, when I looked at Paul, hoping he would say something, do something, he just sighed and muttered that maybe it was better if I calmed down outside for a while, that they would come back to pick me up later, that I shouldn't overreact so much. But they didn't come back. It had been almost 30 minutes, and there was no sign of them. The neighborhood felt increasingly menacing as it grew darker. I saw shadows moving on the corners and heard male voices approaching and receding. An older woman like me, alone in a place like that, was an easy target. I knew it. I felt it in every fibre of my body that screamed at me to find shelter, to move, to do something. But I was paralyzed. Paralyzed by fear, yes, but more than anything, by humiliation. By the devastating realization that my family had abandoned me, literally and emotionally, that the years I spent sacrificing for them had meant nothing, that my love hadn't been enough, that I hadn't been enough. The tears finally began to fall, and I couldn't stop them. I cried there, against that cold, dirty wall, in a neighborhood where no one knew me and no one cared. I cried for all the years of silence, for all the times I swallowed my pride and accepted the scraps of affection they gave me. I cried for the woman I once was, that young, strong Susan who dreamed of a loving family and a bright future. Where had that woman gone? When exactly had I lost her? I was so consumed by my pain that I didn't notice when someone approached. A soft voice, almost a whisper, made me lift my head. It was an elderly woman, perhaps about 10 years older than me, dressed in elegant but simple clothes. She wore dark glasses despite the night and leaned on a white cane. She was blind, and she was standing in front of me, her head slightly tilted, as if she could see me despite her blindness. "Daughter," she said to me with a voice that sounded both ancient and wise, "I can hear your pain from the next block. Nobody cries like that unless their heart is truly broken." I quickly wiped my tears, ashamed that a stranger had found me in that state. I tried to say I was fine, that I was just waiting for someone, but my voice cracked, and the lies died in my throat. The woman came closer, so close that I could see my distorted reflection in her dark glasses. "Listen carefully," she whispered, "because what I'm about to tell you could change everything. I know what happened to you. I know that someone of your own blood left you here as if you were worthless. I know it hurts so much that you think you'll never recover. But I have a proposition for you." My heart beat faster. There was something in her voice, in her presence, that made me feel like this was not a chance encounter, that something bigger was happening, something I couldn't understand yet. She leaned even closer, and her next sentence was barely audible, as if it were a secret only I should hear. "Pretend to be my sister. My driver is on the way. We'll leave here, and we'll make your daughter-in-law regret leaving you behind. But I need you to trust me without asking questions. Can you do that?" I don't know why I nodded. I don't know what made me trust that strange woman in the middle of the night, in a dangerous neighborhood, when everything in my life had taught me to distrust. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the exhaustion of so many years, carrying a pain that no one else saw. Or maybe, just maybe, it was that something in her voice reminded me of that Susan I had lost so long ago. That woman who wasn't afraid to trust, to take risks, to believe that something good could still happen. "Yes," I managed to say with a trembling voice, "I will trust you." She smiled then, a small smile but full of something I couldn't identify. Relief? Satisfaction? Sadness? I didn't know, but I felt that something had just changed in the air of that dark street. Something important, something irreversible. As if the universe itself had heard my pain and decided, at that precise moment, to offer me a way out that I hadn't asked for, but desperately needed. A black car appeared at the end of the street, silently gliding toward us. It was elegant, expensive, completely out of place in that run-down neighborhood. The blind woman raised her cane slightly like a signal, and the car stopped right in front of us. "My driver is here," she said calmly. We are sisters now, Susan. Remember that. And when your daughter-in-law sees what's coming, she'll understand the mistake she made tonight. The interior of the car smelled of fine leather and a soft perfume I couldn't identify. I sank into the back seat, feeling the smooth texture of the upholstery under my trembling hands. The blind woman got in with an elegance that seemed practiced for decades, as if she had performed this exact ritual thousands of times. The driver didn't ask questions. He didn't look at me in the rearview mirror. He simply started the engine, and we began to move away from that cursed neighborhood where my daughter-in-law had abandoned me as if I were a broken object that was no longer useful. As the car traveled through increasingly illuminated and safe streets, I started to feel my body finally relaxing. But my mind wouldn't stop. Who was this woman? Why had she helped me? And what did it mean to pretend to be her sister? As if she had heard my thoughts, she spoke without turning toward me. Her voice was firm, but not cold. My name is Mary Jones. I am 74 years old and lost my sight 15 years ago. But don't think that means I stopped seeing the important things in life. Sometimes, daughter, when you lose one sense, the others become so sharp that you can perceive what others will never notice. I swallowed. I didn't know how to respond. She continued. I heard your crying from my window. I live in the building on the corner, the only one that's still decent in that forgotten neighborhood. And I recognized that kind of pain because I lived it myself many years ago. The pain of being rejected by your own blood. The pain of discovering that everything you gave was never enough. Her words pierced my chest. That was exactly it. Exactly what I felt, but hadn't been able to express clearly. I looked out the window, watching the city lights pass, and felt the tears well up in my eyes again. Tell me, Mary said softly. Tell me how you got to this moment. Tell me your story, Susan. And so I did. Because there was something about that woman, in her serene presence and in her voice full of understanding, that made me feel safe. I started from the beginning, from when Paul was just a baby, and his father decided that the responsibility of a family was too much for him. He left me a note on the kitchen table and $500 that evaporated in less than a month between diapers and formula. I worked cleaning offices at night, while Paul slept in a carrier strapped to my back. During the day, I worked at a laundry folding sheets until my arms ached. I slept 4 hours if I was lucky. I ate the leftovers. Everything good was for my son. All the money I earned went toward his education, his clothes, his books. Mary listened in silence, nodding slightly from time to time. The driver kept driving soundlessly, like a ghost at the wheel. I continued telling her how Paul grew up to be a good boy. He studied well, helped me around the house, told me that when he grew up, he would buy me a big house where I could finally rest. He promised he would take care of me just as I had taken care of him. And I believed him. God, how I believed him. Then he met Brenda. At first, she seemed like a proper girl. She came from a family with money. She had educated manners. She smiled when she should smile. Paul was in love, and I just wanted to see him happy. I never imagined that woman would become my worst nightmare. The first months after the wedding were subtle. Brenda started suggesting I visit less, that they needed their space as a young couple. Then came the comments about my clothes, about my cooking, about my opinions which she claimed were old-fashioned. Paul defended me at first, but over time his defenses grew weaker until they disappeared completely. I moved in with them when they sold my small apartment. Brenda said it was more practical, that we could save money that way. What she didn't say was that I would become their unpaid maid. I cooked, cleaned, washed their clothes, ironed Paul's shirts, and every time I finished a task, Brenda found something wrong with it. The food was too salty or too bland. The clothes weren't ironed enough. I made too much noise in the mornings or didn't clean the bathroom well. Mary made a low sound in her throat, as if she recognized every detail of what I was describing. "I know that story," she murmured. "I've heard it so many times in so many different versions, but the pain is always the same." I kept talking because I couldn't stop. I told her about the family dinners, where I sat at the end of the table like an awkward guest instead of the mother of the family. About the conversation that would fall silent when I entered the room. About how Brenda forbade Paul to give me money for my personal expenses, telling him I would just waste it. I told her about the time I got sick and needed to go to the doctor. Brenda told me to take the bus because she didn't have time to drive me. When Paul suggested that maybe they could pay for a taxi, she made a scene, saying I was always exaggerating my aches and pains to get attention. Paul ended up apologizing to her instead of helping me. Every memory was a new blow. Every story was a wound I had silently kept, thinking that maybe, if I was more compliant, quieter, more invisible, things would get better. But they only got worse. The final straw was tonight. We were coming back from a dinner with Brenda's family. She had invited her parents and siblings, and I was only there because Paul insisted I go. Throughout the dinner, Brenda and her mother talked about how wonderful it would be when they finally had children. About how Brenda would be a perfect mother, not like those women who spoil their sons and make them weak. I knew she was throwing shade at me. I knew every comment was an arrow aimed at me. But I stayed quiet. I smiled when it was time to smile. I nodded when it was time to nod. I became just another piece of furniture in that expensive restaurant where the bill came to $300, and no one asked me if I liked the food. On the way back, I was silent in the back seat. Brenda was driving fast. Too fast. Paul told her to slow down, and she replied that if he didn't like her driving, he could take a taxi. Then I, without thinking, suggested she take the other street, because this one always had traffic at that time. Mary sighed deeply. "And that's when everything erupted, right?" "Yes." Brenda slammed on the brakes so hard I hit the front seat. She turned toward me with a fury I had never seen in her and started screaming at me. That I was nobody to tell her how to drive. That she was sick of my comments, my presence, having to see me every day. That I was a dead weight they carried out of pity. That my only purpose in life had been to raise a son, and I hadn't even done that well because Paul was weak because of me. I asked Paul if he was going to let her talk to me like that. He just said he didn't want any trouble, that both of us should calm down, as if I had done something wrong, as if I were to blame for his wife's cruelty. Brenda kept driving, but her anger didn't subside. She said I was ungrateful, that they had given me a roof and food, and I only gave them trouble, that my generation didn't understand that young people needed their space, that if living with them bothered me so much, I could leave whenever I wanted. Then, without warning, she swerved the car into that horrible neighborhood and stopped on that dark corner. "Get out," she told me. "You need to calm down and reflect on how ungrateful you are. Walk around for a bit and think about whether you really want to continue being a burden to this family." I told her I didn't know the neighborhood, that I had no money or phone. She replied that it wasn't her problem. Paul tried to say something, but she cut him off by telling him that if he defended me, he could get out too and join me. And my son, my only son, for whom I sacrificed my entire life, remained silent. I got out of the car because I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe it was a lesson, that they would come back in a few minutes after I reflected. But the minutes passed and turned into a half hour. The neighborhood grew darker. I heard shouts in the distance and the sound of breaking bottles, and I realized they had truly abandoned me there. The car continued gliding smoothly through the city. Mary remained silent for a long moment after I finished my story. Finally, she spoke. Your daughter-in-law left you there hoping something bad would happen to you, hoping the city would swallow you up so she could say it was your fault for getting out of the car, hoping to free herself from you in the most cowardly way possible. Her words were harsh, but true. I felt a chill run down my spine. And Paul? I asked with a broken voice. Does my son really hate me that much? Your son, Mary answered sadly, doesn't hate you. He has forgotten you. There's a difference. Hate requires energy. It requires that you still matter. But forgetting is worse. It's when someone stops seeing you as a person and turns you into an annoying shadow they wish wouldn't exist. The car finally stopped in front of an old 3-story building. It wasn't luxurious, but it had a quiet dignity that reminded me of buildings from 50 years ago, when things were built to last. The facade was light stone, and the windows had dark wood frames that looked freshly varnished. The driver got out first and opened the door for Mary. She stepped out with the same elegance she had entered with, leaning slightly on her cane. Then she offered her hand to me. Come on, Susan. Tonight you'll sleep under a roof where no one will make you feel like you're in the way. Her words broke something inside me. I took her hand and got out of the car, feeling my legs still trembling. The night air was fresher here, clean, without that smell of garbage and hopelessness from the neighborhood where they had left me. We went up 3 flights of stairs. Mary knew them by heart despite her blindness, counting the steps softly and touching the wall with her free hand. I followed her in silence, still processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. When we reached her apartment, she took an old key from her coat pocket and opened the door. The interior surprised me. I expected something dark, full of old furniture and dust, but the place was impeccably clean and organized. There were plants in the windows, soft cream-colored curtains, and furniture that, though old, was well cared for. Sit down, she instructed, pointing to a sofa near the window. I'll make some tea. Or maybe you prefer coffee. I have both. Tea is fine, I replied in a weak voice. I sat on the sofa and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could fully breathe. The silence in the apartment was not oppressive like the silence in Paul and Brenda's house. It was peaceful, like a warm hug. Mary moved around the kitchen with an astonishing precision. She knew exactly where everything was, counted the steps between the refrigerator and the stove, touched the objects to identify them. In a few minutes, she had a kettle boiling and was pouring 2 cups. She sat opposite me and handed me a cup. The tea smelled of chamomile and something else I couldn't identify. We drank in silence for a moment. The hot liquid comforted me from the inside, slowly undoing the knot of tension that had been in my chest all night. Now, Mary said, putting her cup on the small table, let me explain why I brought you here, and why I need you to pretend to be my sister. I straightened up in the seat, paying close attention. She continued, 40 years ago, I lived through something very similar to what you experience today. My daughter and her husband treated me as if I were an object they could use when it suited them and put away when it didn't. They had me cleaning their house, taking care of their children, cooking their meals. But they never invited me to important dinners. They never introduced me to their friends as their mother, but as the lady who helped them. Her voice carried a weight that came from very deep places. I kept listening without interrupting. One day my daughter told me she had found a place for me in a retirement home. She said it was for my own good, that I would be better cared for there. But I knew the truth. They wanted to get rid of me. They wanted my house, which was in my name, and they wanted their freedom without the burden of an elderly mother. What did you do? I asked in a whisper. Mary smiled, but there was no joy in the gesture. I refused to go. I told them that house was mine, and I wasn't planning on leaving it. Then the real hell began. My daughter stopped visiting me. My grandchildren, whom I had cared for since they were babies, stopped coming. For 2 years I lived alone in that big house, feeling like a ghost in my own life. She took another sip of tea before continuing. Then I lost my sight, a degenerative disease that the doctors couldn't stop. And when my daughter found out, she returned, but not out of love or concern. She returned because she saw an opportunity. A blind woman can't take care of herself, she said. A blind woman needs constant help. And she was willing to help me, of course, as long as I gave her my house. I felt my stomach clench. The story was so familiar it hurt. That's horrible, I murmured. It's like we were used our whole lives, and now they want to get rid of the evidence of everything we sacrificed for them. Exactly, Mary said. But I didn't give her my house. I learned to fend for myself despite my blindness. I hired a trusted driver who helps me when I need it. I organized my life in such a way that I didn't depend on anyone. And my daughter, seeing that she wouldn't get what she wanted, left again. It's been 15 years since I've heard anything from her. And it doesn't hurt? I asked. Don't you miss having your family close? Every day, she admitted. But I learned that it's better to be alone with dignity than accompanied by people who make you feel invisible. The pain of loneliness can be endured. The pain of constant humiliation destroys your soul. Her words resonated in my chest like church bells. There was a profound truth in every syllable. I drank more tea, feeling that something inside me was beginning to change. I didn't know what it was yet, but it was as if a door sealed for years was slowly starting to open. Now, Mary continued, I'll tell you why I need you to pretend to be my sister. It turns out that my daughter found out a month ago that I have a considerable savings account. Money I saved my entire life working. It's almost $200,000 that I plan to leave to a foundation that helps elderly women abandoned by their families. $200,000. The figure took my breath away. It was more money than I had seen in my entire life. My daughter called me after 15 years of silence, Mary continued with irony in her voice. She said she wanted to reconcile, that she had been thinking about me and regretted how things had ended, that she wanted us to be a family again. Did you believe her? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Of course not. But I decided to play her game. I told her I was happy about her call, and that I would be delighted to see her. She's coming to visit me next weekend. And when she arrives, you'll be here, my dear younger sister who has just returned after living years abroad. I didn't understand where all this was going. Why do you want me to pretend to be your sister? Mary leaned forward, and although she couldn't see me, I felt the weight of her blind gaze on me. Because I want my daughter to see that I'm not alone. I want her to know that I have family who cares for me and loves me. And most importantly, I want her to understand that she won't be able to manipulate me to get my money. When she sees that I have someone else, someone who could be an heir too, maybe she'll show her true colors. It was a calculated plan, almost cruel in its precision, but there was a justice in it that I couldn't deny. And what do I gain from this? I asked. Mary smiled. You'll gain a place to stay while you decide what to do with your life. You'll gain time away from that house where they make you feel miserable, and you'll gain the satisfaction of seeing that you're not the only one who suffered at the hands of an ungrateful family. Sometimes, Susan, knowing that we are not alone in our pain is what gives us the strength to move forward. I thought about her offer. I could go back to Paul and Brenda, apologize for something I didn't even do wrong, and go back to being invisible in my own life. Or I could stay here, in this quiet apartment with this strange woman who seemed to understand me better than my own blood. "I accept," I finally said. "I will pretend to be your sister, but I need you to tell me something. Why are you really helping me? Is it just for your plan, or is there something more?" Mary was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "When I heard you crying tonight, it was like hearing myself 40 years ago. And I thought that if someone had reached out to me at that moment, if someone had told me I wasn't crazy, that it wasn't my fault, that I deserved better, maybe my life would have been different. I can't change my past, Susan, but maybe I can help you change your future." Her words completely broke me. The tears I had been holding back for hours finally came out uncontrollably. I cried for everything lost, for all the wasted years, for all the dignity I had sacrificed thinking it was love. And Mary got up, came over to the sofa, and hugged me. We stayed like that, two women broken by the same wounds, finding comfort in the company of a stranger who understood the universal language of rejected maternal pain. When I finally calmed down, Mary showed me the room where I would sleep. It was small but cozy, with a clean bed and sheets that smelled of lavender. "Rest," she told me from the doorway. "Tomorrow we'll start planning how to make your daughter-in-law understand she made the biggest mistake of her life." I lay down on that strange but comfortable bed and looked at the ceiling. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the city, but inside, everything was silence and peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of being a burden. I didn't feel like I had to earn my right to exist. I was simply there, allowing myself to be. I woke up with the sunlight filtering through the cream-colored curtains. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The mattress was softer than the old sofa bed where I slept at Paul and Brenda's house. The air smelled different, clean, without that scent of industrial cleaning products that my daughter-in-law insisted on using throughout the house. Then I remembered everything. The abandonment, the dark corner, Mary, the apartment, the proposal to pretend to be her sister. I sat up in bed, feeling that my body was exhausted, but my mind was strangely alert. There was an antique clock on the nightstand. It read Luke 9 Geo 00 Foot. It had been years since I had slept that late. At my son's house, I had to get up at Luke 6 Geo 00 Foot to make breakfast before Brenda came downstairs. If I didn't, she spent all day reminding me how useless I was. I got up and found yesterday's clothes folded on a chair. The bedroom door was ajar, and I could hear soft movements in the kitchen. I quickly got dressed and went out. Mary was sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She wore a simple light brown dress, and her white hair was pulled back in a perfect bun. Despite her blindness, there was something in her posture that conveyed absolute control of her space. "Good morning," she said without turning. "There's fresh coffee in the kitchen. The cups are in the cabinet on the right, second shelf. The bread is in the bread box on the counter, and there's cheese and ham in the refrigerator." I poured myself coffee with trembling hands. It was still hard to believe I was there, in a stranger's apartment, planning to pretend to be her sister to trick her daughter. It seemed like a plot from those cheap novels they sold in supermarkets. "Sit down," Mary instructed when I returned with my cup. "We need to talk about the details of our story. If we're going to convince my daughter that we're sisters, every detail needs to fit perfectly." I sat across from her and took a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly how I liked it. "What do I need to know?" I asked. Mary leaned back in her chair. "My full name is Mary Jones. I was born 74 years ago in a small town near Kansas City, Missouri. My father was a carpenter, and my mother was a seamstress. I had a younger sister who died of a fever when she was 5 years old. Her name was Susan. I felt a chill run down my spine. Your sister was named Susan? That's right. And you are going to take her place in this story. We'll say that she didn't die, that my parents sent her to live with an aunt in the United States because they couldn't afford 2 daughters, that we lost contact for decades, but that we recently reconnected thanks to the internet. It was an elaborate lie, but believable. In those days, it was common for poor families to send their children to relatives who had better opportunities. Does your daughter know you had a sister? She knows she existed, but I never talked much about her. The subject was painful. Now I'll tell her I discovered that Susan hadn't died, that all my life I believed a lie my parents told me to protect me from the pain of separation. I drank more coffee, processing the information. And what am I supposed to have done all these years? Mary smiled slightly. You lived in Texas. You married a man who worked in construction. You had 1 son, but your husband died 10 years ago in an accident. Your son lives in California now. He's married and has his own family. You're coming back because you wanted to reconnect with your roots before you got too old. The story was simple but solid. It didn't have complicated details that could make me stumble. And how do you explain me staying here with you? Because you're my sister and we have a lot of lost time to make up for. Plus, you said there are plumbing issues in your apartment in Texas and it will take weeks to fix. So in the meantime, you're staying with me. I nodded slowly. I could do this. I could act as her sister for a few days. It wasn't that different from acting as the perfect daughter-in-law and the invisible mother-in-law for years. At least this time, the role gave me some dignity. There's something else, Mary said in a more serious tone. My daughter's name is Lauren Jones Miller. She's 52 years old. She's married to a man named Jonathan, and they have 2 adult children. Lauren works in real estate and has always been obsessed with money and appearances. What is she like? I asked out of curiosity. Mary sighed. She was a sweet girl when she was little. She liked to paint and dreamed of being an artist. But as she grew up, her father, my husband, put it in her head that art was for poor people and that she should focus on making money. When he died 20 years ago, Lauren had already transformed into someone I didn't recognize, someone hard, calculating, who measured the value of people by what they could give her. It sounded familiar. Perhaps not so different from how Brenda measured my worth by the services I could provide her. When she comes to visit you, I continued asking, how should I behave? Like my sister, with confidence, with familiarity. Don't be intimidated by her. Remember that in this story, you lived in the United States for decades. You are a woman who has seen the world, who has worked hard, who has lost and survived. You have your own strength. Don't let Lauren make you feel small. Her words filled me with something akin to courage. For years I had shrunk myself to take up less space, to annoy less, to be less visible. What would it feel like to do the opposite? What would it feel like to take up space without asking permission? We spent the rest of the morning going over details. Mary told me stories from her childhood that I needed to know if I were truly her sister. She spoke to me about the town where they grew up, the house with the red-tiled roof and a dirt yard, the mango tree they used to play under. She described her parents in such detail that I could see them in my mind. The serious but affectionate father, the quiet but strong mother. She also taught me how to move around the apartment without disturbing her. Mary had everything organized in a certain way to be able to navigate her space without sight. The furniture never moved. Objects always returned to the same place. It was a perfect system born out of necessity. At noon, we prepared lunch together. I cut the vegetables while Mary cooked them, using her sense of smell and hearing to know when they were ready. I was surprised by how independent she was. She didn't need constant help, just occasional small indications. While we ate, Mary spoke more about her plan. Lauren is coming on Saturday in 4 days. That gives us time for you to familiarize yourself with the story and with this place. I also need you to go shopping. Shopping? I asked, confused. Mary nodded. You need new clothes. If you lived in the United States and have a stable life, you can't dress like someone who has been serving in other people's houses. You need to look like an independent woman, with dignity and her own resources. I felt a mixture of excitement and shame. I couldn't remember the last time I bought clothes for myself. Everything I had were old, worn-out garments that Brenda sometimes passed down to me when they no longer fit her. But I don't have any money, I said quietly. I will give you the money. Consider this an investment in our plan. Besides, she said with a small smile, I want my sister to look good when you meet my ungrateful daughter. That afternoon, the driver took us to a shopping mall. Mary gave me $500 in cash and told me to buy what I needed. Pants, blouses, a nice dress, comfortable but elegant shoes. Clothes that would make me feel like the woman I should have been if I hadn't spent decades making myself invisible. I walked into the stores feeling like I was doing something forbidden. Every time I touched a garment, a voice in my head told me it was too expensive, too nice, too good for me. But I pushed that voice down and started trying things on. I bought 2 pairs of dress pants in black and dark grey, 3 blouses in soft but elegant colours, a wine-coloured dress that fit me perfectly and made me look 10 years younger, closed-toe shoes with a small heel that gave me height yet without being uncomfortable. I even allowed myself to buy a light perfume that smelled of white flowers. When I returned to the car carrying the bags, I felt something strange in my chest. It was happiness, simple, almost childlike happiness, for something as basic as having new clothes that I had chosen myself. I felt like crying, but I held back. Mary was waiting for me in the car with her serene expression. Did you find everything you needed? Yes, I replied with an excited voice. Thank you, Mary. I don't know how to repay you for all this. Don't thank me yet, she said. This is just beginning. When my daughter comes, you'll need all the strength you can muster. Lauren can smell fear and insecurity like sharks smell blood. If she sees you weak, she will attack you. Her words made me serious again. This was not a game. It was a silent battle between 2 wounded women and their ungrateful families. And I had just become a soldier in an army I never thought would exist. That night, as I put on one of my new outfits in front of the bedroom mirror, I truly saw myself for the first time in years. I didn't see the invisible mother-in-law desperate to please. I saw Susan, a woman of 64 years old who had survived abandonment, betrayal, and pain. A woman who was still standing. The next 3 days passed in a strange mix of calm and anticipation. Every morning I woke up in that comfortable bed, still surprised to be there. Every night I fell asleep thinking about what would happen when Lauren finally showed up. Mary and I fell into a natural routine. I prepared breakfast while she organized her day. Sometimes her driver would take her to run errands or visit a friend. Other times, she stayed home, and I kept her company in the comfortable silence we had built between us 2. We talked a lot. I told her more details of my life with Paul and Brenda, things I had never told anyone because I was ashamed to admit them out loud. Like the time Brenda made me wash her underwear by hand, because she said the washing machine ruined them. But in reality, she just wanted to humiliate me. Or when Paul asked me not to come down for dinner because they had important guests and my presence might be awkward. Mary listened to every story attentively and sometimes added her own experiences. She told me about the time her daughter Lauren took her to a retirement home to see it, telling her it was just an educational visit, but then tried to leave her there by signing papers behind her back. Mary had to call a lawyer to get out of that place. On Thursday afternoon, we were having tea when Mary said something that changed my perspective on everything. Do you know the difference between you and me, Susan? I learned years ago that love is not begged for. True love is given freely, or it is not love. What you have been receiving from your son is not love. It is tolerance conditioned on your usefulness. Her words hurt because they were true. I had spent years trying to earn Paul's love by being more useful, quieter, more invisible. Thinking that if I was perfect, if I didn't cause problems, if I became absolutely indispensable, then he would love me. But Mary was right. What I was looking for wasn't love. It was surviving the scraps of affection they threw at me when it suited them. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself with brutal honesty. I was 64 years old, wrinkles around my eyes and mouth, grey hairs I had stopped colouring years ago because Brenda said it was an unnecessary expense, rough hands from so much cleaning and washing. But I also saw something else. I saw a woman who had survived, who had raised a son alone, who had worked until exhaustion, who had endured humiliations that would have broken weaker people. I was not a finished woman. I was a woman who was just beginning to wake up. On Friday, Mary told me we needed to do something important. We're going to the bank. I want to add you as a beneficiary to my account. I froze. Mary, you can't do that. You barely know me. It's only been a few days. She smiled with that serene expression that was already familiar to me. Precisely why I can do it. You don't know me well enough to want to steal from me. You don't have expectations about my money. And most importantly, you've shown me more respect and genuine companionship in these days than my own daughter in decades. But your daughter, I protested. She's going to think I manipulated you, that I took advantage of your blindness. Let her think what she wants, Mary replied firmly. This is my money, and I decide what to do with it. Besides, this is part of the plan. When Lauren sees that I've added someone else as a beneficiary, she'll show her true colours. She won't be able to pretend she cares about me anymore. She'll have to admit she only came for the inheritance. We went to the bank that afternoon. The manager knew Mary and greeted her with genuine respect. She explained that she wanted to add her sister, Susan, as a beneficiary of her account, with a right to 50% of the funds in the event of her death. The manager looked at me with curiosity, but didn't ask impertinent questions. He processed the paperwork efficiently while I signed documents, unable to believe what was happening. In a matter of 30 minutes, I, who had spent years not having even $50 of my own, was listed as a beneficiary of $100,000. When we left the bank, I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. Mary, this is too much. I can't accept this. It's already done, she said calmly. And it's not a gift. It's a strategy. It's also a message for my daughter. And maybe, just maybe, it's my way of giving another woman the security I wished I had when I was young and vulnerable. That night, I could barely sleep. I thought about Paul and Brenda. Were they worried about me? Had they looked for me? Or had they simply carried on with their lives as if I had never existed? Part of me wanted to know. Another part was afraid of the answer. Saturday dawned with a grey sky that threatened rain. Mary got up earlier than usual, and I could feel her tension. Today is the day, she said as we had breakfast. She will arrive at Luke 3 Geo 00 Foot. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Mary leaned over and took my hands in hers. Listen to me well, Susan. Today you're going to meet a woman who will probably try to make you feel small. It's her way of establishing control. But you are not small. You are my sister, a woman who has lived, who has lost, who has survived. You have as much right as she does to take up space in this world. Her words filled me with something akin to courage. I put on the wine-coloured dress I had bought, carefully styled my hair, and even put on light makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a different woman. Not perfect, not young, but dignified. At Luke chapter 3, Joel Zervro Foot, the doorbell rang. My heart started pounding so hard I thought Mary could hear it. She calmly got up and went to the door. I stayed in the living room, standing by the window, trying to look natural. The door opened and I heard a feminine voice. "Mom, it's so good to see you. You look well." "Lauren, what a joy that you came," Mary replied with a tone that sounded genuine, but which I now knew to identify as an act. "Come in, I have a surprise for you." I heard footsteps in the hallway, and then Lauren entered the living room. She was a medium-height woman, thin, dressed in expensive clothes, but with no real style. Her hair was dyed a blonde that didn't suit her, and she wore excessive makeup that tried to hide her age. But what struck me the most were her eyes. They were cold, calculating, evaluating every detail of the room and of me. "Lauren," Mary said with a clear voice, "I want to introduce you to someone very special. This is Susan, my sister." The silence that followed was dense and heavy. Lauren looked me up and down with an expression of absolute confusion. "Your sister? But Mum, your sister died when you were a child. You told me 1,000 times." "That's what I believed my entire life," Mary explained in a calm voice. "But 2 months ago, I received a message online. It turns out that Susan didn't die. Our parents sent her to live with an aunt in Texas and lied to me to avoid the pain of separation. She grew up there, made her life, and recently decided to look for her roots. We reconnected after almost 70 years. The story sounded convincing, even to me who knew it was a lie. Lauren continued to look at me with suspicion. "And she just shows up out of nowhere after all these years? How do you know she's really your sister? She could be any con artist taking advantage of your blindness." Mary tensed, but kept her voice calm. "Susan knows details of our childhood that no one else could know. The mango tree in the yard, the house with the tile roof, the names of our parents. Her stories match my memories perfectly." "Anyone could have researched that," Lauren insisted. "Mum, you need to be more careful. There are a lot of bad people who take advantage of the elderly." Her words reeked of venom disguised as concern. I decided it was time to speak. I walked over with my head held high and offered her my hand. "Pleased to meet you, Lauren. I've heard a lot about you. Mary told me you work in real estate and have 2 beautiful children." Lauren didn't immediately take my hand. She evaluated me for a few more seconds before briefly shaking it. Her grip was weak, disdainful. "Yes, I work in real estate. And you? What do you do?" "I lived in Texas most of my life," I replied with the story we had prepared. "I worked in several things. My husband died years ago, and my son now lives in California with his family. I decided to come to the US to reconnect with my roots before I got too old to do it." "How convenient," Lauren said with barely disguised sarcasm. "And now you live here with my mother." "Temporarily," I clarified, "while I sort out some problems with my apartment in Texas. Mary was kind enough to open her doors to me. We've been making up for lost time." Lauren turned to her mother with a harsh expression. "Mum, I need to talk to you alone." Mary maintained her serene but firm expression. "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say in front of Susan. She's my sister, and I have no secrets from her." I watched Lauren's jaw clench. It was clear she hadn't expected that response. She looked between her mother and me, calculating her next move. Finally, she sighed with exaggerated drama and sat down on the sofa without waiting for an invitation. "Fine," she said, crossing her legs. "Then let's talk clearly. Mum, it's been 15 years since we spoke. I know things ended badly between us, and I want to apologize for that. I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about what really matters, and I realized I made mistakes." Her words sounded rehearsed, like a speech she had practiced in front of the mirror. Mary sat in her usual chair, and I remained standing near the window, observing the scene as if it were a play. "I appreciate your words, Lauren," Mary responded in a neutral tone, "but I wonder what prompted this change of heart after so much time." Lauren smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mum, sometimes one simply matures. My children are adults now. My life is more stable, and I realized that I don't want any more time to pass without us having a relationship. You're my mother, the only one I have." There was something deeply false in her whole display of emotion. I recognized it because I had seen similar performances in Brenda 1,000 times. That way of saying the right words, while the eyes told a completely different story. "And then I show up," I said, interrupting the moment. "And that complicates your plans for reconciliation." Lauren looked at me with barely contained coldness. "I don't know what you mean." I walked over and sat down on the other sofa, facing her directly. "Of course you do. After 15 years of silence, you show up just when Mary has family again, when she's no longer alone and vulnerable like you left her." Lauren's face hardened. "You have no right to comment on my relationship with my mother. You just showed up in her life 2 months ago. I'm her daughter. I've known her since I was born." "And yet you abandoned her," I replied, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You left her alone for 15 years. No calls, no visits, no knowing if she was okay or if she needed help. I barely know her, and I've been more present than you in over a decade." The silence that followed was tense and electric. Mary remained quiet, allowing the confrontation to unfold. Lauren looked at me with pure hatred, all her masks of a concerned daughter quickly vanishing. "You don't know what you're talking about," Lauren said with a cold voice. "You don't know the whole story. My mother and I had differences. That's all. Differences that I now want to resolve." "Differences about your attempt to put her in a retirement home to keep her house?" I asked. "Mary told me that story. She told me how you tried to make her sign papers without reading them, how you wanted to declare her incompetent just because she lost her sight." Lauren abruptly stood up. "That's a lie. My mother is confused. Blindness sometimes affects more than just sight. It affects memory, the perception of things." "Enough," Mary said, with a voice that cut the air. "Lauren, my mind is perfectly clear, and I remember exactly what happened 15 years ago. I remember how you took me to that place, telling me it was just a visit. I remember how you signed the admission papers without my consent, and I remember how I had to call my lawyer to get out of there." Lauren opened her mouth to protest, but Mary raised her hand. "I'm not finished. I also remember the 15 years of silence that followed, the birthdays without a call, the Christmases spent alone, the times I was sick and didn't have anyone of my own blood to worry about me. So forgive me if my memory is too clear for your comfort." Lauren's face went through several expressions: surprise, fury, and finally something akin to panic. "Mum, I know I made mistakes. That's why I'm here. To make amends. To start over." Mary leaned back in her chair. "And your sudden interest in starting over has nothing to do with the call you received from your cousin Benjamin informing you about my savings account." I watched Lauren turn pale. "That cursed Benjamin," she muttered under her breath, before realizing what she had said. Then she tried to recover. "No, of course not. I don't know what you're talking about." "Lauren," Mary said with a tired voice, "you were always a bad liar. Benjamin works at the bank where I have my account. He called me a month ago to tell me you had been asking him about my finances, that you wanted to know how much money I had and if I had made a will. 2 weeks later, you called me wanting to reconcile. Do you really think I'm that foolish?" Lauren remained silent, her expression showing she was recalculating her strategy. Finally, she sank back onto the sofa. "Fine. Yes, I found out you have considerable savings, and yes, that made me think about you, but not in the way you think. I thought that if you have so much money saved, it's because you've been living very modestly, probably alone and without support. And I felt guilty. It was a clever move, I admit, turning her greed into belated maternal concern. But Mary wasn't fooled. "I have $200,000 saved," Mary said with a clear voice. "Money I saved my entire life working. And you're right that I've lived modestly, but not out of necessity, but by choice, because that money has a purpose." Lauren's eyes sparkled with barely disguised greed. "What purpose?" "I'm going to donate it to a foundation that helps elderly women abandoned by their families," Mary replied. "Women like me, like Susan, who dedicated their lives to their children and ended up alone and rejected. I want that money to do some good in the world." I watched Lauren process the information. Her face went from hope to disbelief and finally to fury. "You're going to give away $200,000 to strangers instead of giving it to your own family?" "You stopped being my family 15 years ago," Mary replied with devastating calm. "When you left me in that retirement home, when you never came back to see if I was okay, when you decided that your comfort was more important than your mother." "But I'm your daughter," Lauren screamed, standing up again. "I'm your blood. That money belongs to me by right." "That money belongs to me," Mary corrected. "And I decide what to do with it. In fact, I already updated my will 2 days ago. 50% will go to the foundation, and the other 50% will go to Susan." The silence was absolute. Lauren looked at me with such hatred that I felt a chill. "This is your fault," she said to me with a venomous voice. "You show up out of nowhere and put ideas in her head. You're a con artist, a manipulator who takes advantage of vulnerable elderly people." "Be careful what you say," I replied, standing firm despite the fear I felt. "Your mother is perfectly capable of making her own decisions. And if she decided to leave me something, it's because I've been here. I've been her company. I've listened to her stories. I've done what you should have done all these years." Lauren turned to her mother in desperation. "Mom, please, you can't do this. I'm your daughter. I have children who are your grandchildren. We need that money." "What do you need it for?" Mary asked. "Your husband earns well. You have your real estate business. Your children are already adults with their own jobs. No one in your family is starving or in real need." "But it's a lot of money," Lauren protested. "Money that could secure your grandchildren's future." "My grandchildren who haven't visited me in 15 years, Mary pointed out, who probably don't even remember my face, that you never brought to meet me, not even when they were born. Forgive me if I don't feel obligated to secure the future of strangers who share my blood, but not my life." Lauren started crying. They were calculated tears, the kind she had perfected over the years to manipulate situations in her favor. "Mom, please, I made mistakes, but I can change. Give me another chance. Don't let this woman come between us." "This woman has a name," I said firmly. "And I'm not coming between anything. Your relationship with your mother broke long before I showed up. I'm just here to make sure you don't hurt her again." Lauren wiped her tears with fury. "You're going to regret this. I'm going to investigate you. I'm going to find out who you really are, and I'm going to expose your fraud. And then my mother will see that she was right about you from the beginning." "Go ahead," I said, feeling my heart beating fast, but keeping my voice calm. "Investigate all you want. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find. Just a woman who found her sister again after decades apart." Lauren grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "This isn't over. Mum, I'm going to contest that will. I'm going to take you to court if necessary. That money is mine by right, and I'm not going to let a con artist take it from me." "You can try," Mary replied calmly, "but I have all the documents in order. My will was made by the best lawyer in the city, and I was evaluated by 3 different doctors who certified my mental capacity. You don't have a case, Lauren. All you'll achieve is spending money on lawyers who won't give you what you want in the end." Lauren stood by the door with her hand on the knob. Her body trembled with contained rage. I realized she was trying to decide if there was any other strategy she could use, any other card to play. Finally, she turned to us one last time. Her face had completely changed. Nothing remained of the remorseful daughter or the concerned woman. There was only pure, hard contempt. "You know what, Mum?" she said with a voice cold as ice. "You're right. I don't need you. I never really needed you. You were always a burden, always with your complaints and your constant need for attention. You did me a favor when I left you in that retirement home. My only mistake was taking you out of there." Mary didn't flinch at her daughter's words. She maintained her upright posture and her serene expression. "At least now you're being honest," she said. "It's the closest thing to a real moment we've had in decades." Lauren let out a bitter laugh. "You want honesty? Fine. I hope you live many more years, Mum. But may you live them alone with your precious fake sister. Because when you finally die, I won't go to your funeral. I won't cry for you. And I'll teach my children to forget they ever had a grandmother." With that, she left the apartment, slamming the door so hard it made the door frames shake. The silence that remained afterward was heavy and dense. I stood still, not knowing what to do or say. Mary remained seated in her chair, her hands crossed in her lap. Her face showed neither pain nor surprise, only a kind of quiet resignation, as if she had been expecting exactly that outcome. "Are you okay?" I asked finally, approaching her. She nodded slowly. "I'm better than okay, Susan. I finally saw the truth unfiltered. For years I wondered if I had been too hard on Lauren, if maybe I had misinterpreted her intentions. Now I know with certainty that I was not wrong, and there's a strange peace in that certainty." I sat down next to her and took her hand. "I'm sorry. I know that even though you expected this, it still hurts." Mary squeezed my hand gently. "It hurts, yes. But it's a clean pain. Do you understand? It's not the constant agony of doubt and hope. It's the pain of closing a wound that has been open for too long. Now it can truly begin to heal." We sat like that for several minutes. 2 women united by the shared pain of being rejected by those who were supposed to love us. Outside, it began to rain, the drops hitting against the windows in a steady, comforting rhythm. "You know," Mary said after a while, "when I lost my sight, I thought it was the end of my life, that all I had left was to wait for death in the darkness. But blindness taught me to see things I ignored before. It taught me to truly listen, to feel people's energy, to distinguish between empty words and true ones." She turned toward me, although she couldn't see me. "And that's why I knew from the moment I heard you crying on that corner that you were different, that your pain was genuine. that you weren't acting or manipulating. You were just broken and needed help, like I was broken once. Her words filled my eyes with tears. Thank you for helping me, Mary. Thank you for giving me a place to regain my dignity. She smiled. Don't thank me yet, because now comes the hardest part. Now you have to decide what to do with your own life, with your own son and your own daughter-in-law. You have to decide if you're going to go back to being invisible, or if you're going to claim your right to exist with dignity. The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. During these days, I had been so busy helping Mary with her situation that I had avoided thinking about mine. But she was right. Eventually, I would have to face Paul and Brenda. I would have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with them. I don't know if I can do what you did, I admitted. I don't know if I'm strong enough to cut ties with my only son. Mary leaned forward. Strength is not cutting ties, Susan. Strength is setting boundaries. It's saying, I love you, but I won't accept you treating me as less than human. It's choosing your own peace over their comfort. Can you do that? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't go back to being the woman I had been before. That woman who made herself small, who apologized for existing, who accepted scraps and called them love. That woman had died on that dark corner where they abandoned me. I can try, I finally said. I can try to be stronger. That's all any of us can do, Mary replied. Try. And if we fail, we get up and try again. That night, as the rain continued to fall outside, Mary told me more stories about her life. She talked about when she was young and strong, when she dreamed of being a dancer, but her family couldn't afford the classes. She told me about her husband, a man who genuinely loved her for 30 years before dying of a heart attack. She spoke about her little daughter, before the world hardened her and turned her into the bitter woman who had been in the apartment today. She also spoke about her real sister, the true Susan who died at 5 years old from a fever, the girl who was her best friend during the few years she lived, the sister who chased butterflies with her in the yard and who shared whispered secrets in the darkness of their shared room. When I saw you that night, Mary said with a soft voice, for a moment, it was as if my sister had returned, as if the universe was giving me a second chance to have someone who genuinely cared without expectations or conditions. I felt that too, I admitted, like I had found the family I was always supposed to have, the family we choose instead of the one we get by blood. Mary nodded. Exactly. And you know what, Susan? Maybe that's the most important lesson we both needed to learn. That family is not defined by blood, but by love, respect, and genuine presence. And by that definition, you and I are more sisters than Lauren and I ever were mother and daughter. We hugged then, two women whom destiny had united in the darkness and who now supported each other in the light. Outside, the storm continued to roar, but inside there was peace. A peace neither of us had felt in years. The next day, I woke up with a strange feeling. It was as if something had changed during the night, as if an invisible burden I had been carrying for years had finally lightened a bit. Mary was in the kitchen making coffee. "Good morning, sister," she said to me with a smile. And for the first time, the word didn't feel like an act or a convenient lie. It felt like the truth. "Good morning," I replied, feeling myself smile too. "What will we do today?" "Today," Mary said, pouring 2 cups of coffee, "we are going to start planning your future, because you have to decide what to do when Paul and Brenda finally look for you. And believe me, they will look for you. Guilt or convenience will eventually bring them back." She was right, of course. I couldn't hide in Mary's apartment forever. Eventually, I would have to face my own reality. my own broken family, my own difficult decisions. But for the first time in years, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I had the strength to do it. 2 more weeks passed before Paul finally made contact. Mary and I had settled into a comfortable routine that felt more real with each passing day. She taught me how to navigate the city, introduced me to her neighbors as her sister, and I cared for her in small but meaningful ways. We were having coffee one morning when my phone rang. I had left it off for days, but that morning something made me turn it on. The screen lit up with 17 missed calls from Paul and 32 text messages. "It's him," I told Mary with a trembling voice. She put her cup on the table. "What do the messages say?" I checked them one by one. The first ones were casual, almost indifferent. "Mum, where are you? Brenda says you got out of the car and haven't come back." Then they became more urgent. "Mum, I'm worried. Call me." And finally, in the last few days, there was desperation. "Mum, please, I need to know you're okay. Brenda is very sorry. She wants to apologize." Mary made a sound of contempt. "Brenda is sorry now that enough time has passed for her to realize she has no one to clean the house." She was right, of course. But despite everything, he was my son. And a part of me, the part that still remembered the boy who used to hug me and tell me I was the best mum in the world, wanted to believe him. "Are you going to answer him?" Mary asked. "I don't know. Should I?" She leaned back in her chair. "That's a question only you can answer, Susan. But if you decide to do it from your strength, not from your need. Don't go back because you feel lonely or guilty. Go back, if you go back at all, because they have demonstrated that they deserve you." Her words gave me clarity. I decided to reply with a simple message. "I'm fine. I'm with family. When I'm ready to talk, I'll contact you." Paul's response arrived in seconds. "Mum, thank God. Where are you? I'll come get you right now. Brenda wants to see you. We need to talk." "No," I replied. "When I'm ready, not before." There was a long pause before his next message arrived. "Okay, but please, don't take too long. I miss you." Those 2 words all broke me a little. I miss you. Was it true? Or did he just miss my services, my silent presence that made his life easier? I didn't know, and that uncertainty hurt me more than anything else. For the next few days, Paul continued sending messages. Some were simple greetings. Others were more elaborate, telling me about his day, about things happening at the house. Brenda appeared in some messages, always in the third person. Brenda says she's sorry. Brenda asks when you're coming back. Brenda wants to talk to you. Never herself. Always through Paul, as if even her repentance had to be mediated, filtered, made more acceptable through someone else. Mary noticed my growing restlessness. "Are you thinking of going back?" she said one afternoon. It wasn't a question. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's my son, Mary. He's the only thing I have in this world besides you." "That's not true," she replied firmly. "You have your dignity. You have your peace. You have a life you are just beginning to rebuild. And you have me, yes, but you also have something more important. You have yourself." "But what if he really has changed?" I asked desperately. "What if Brenda really is sorry? What if I can have a relationship with my son that is real?" Mary sighed. "Then put them to the test. Don't go running back. Make them come to you. Make them prove that this repentance is real and not just convenience." She was right. I sent Paul a message. "If you want to see me, you can come here." And I gave him Mary's apartment address. His response was immediate. We'll come tomorrow. What time works for you? At Luke 4 Geo 00 foot in the afternoon, I replied. That night, I could barely sleep. Mary found me in the living room at Luke 3 Geo 00 foot in the morning, sitting in the darkness, looking out the window. She sat down next to me without saying anything for a long time. I'm scared, I finally admitted. I'm afraid that they'll see me, and I'll turn back into that small woman who doesn't know how to say no. I'm afraid that everything I've learned here will evaporate the moment I see my son. Mary took my hand. Then remember this, Susan. Remember how you felt when they left you on that corner. Remember the humiliation, the fear, the feeling of being worthless. And ask yourself if any amount of apology can erase that. I'm not saying you shouldn't forgive them, but forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And it definitely does not mean putting yourself back in a position where they can hurt you again. At Lukbonzo Khumsom foot in the afternoon the next day, the doorbell rang. Mary stayed in her room, giving me privacy, but close enough to intervene if necessary. I opened the door with my heart pounding so hard I thought it would jump out of my chest. Paul was there, and behind him Brenda. My son looked tired, with deep, dark circles and a thinner face than I remembered. Brenda, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable but not exactly remorseful. She wore expensive clothes and perfect makeup, as if this were a business meeting and not an apology. "Mum," Paul said, and there were tears in his eyes. God, I was so worried. He took a step forward as if to hug me, but something in my posture stopped him. "Come in," I said, my voice colder than I intended. They sat on the sofa, looking around the apartment with poorly disguised curiosity. Brenda especially evaluated every detail, probably calculating the value of things. "Who lives here?" Paul asked. "You said you were with family." "An aunt," I lied, using the story Mary and I had agreed upon. "An aunt I hadn't seen in years. She's been taking care of me." Brenda finally spoke. "Susan, I want to apologize for what happened that night. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. I never should have left you in that neighborhood. It was a terrible mistake." Her words sounded rehearsed, empty. There was no real shame in her voice, only the discomfort of someone fulfilling an unpleasant obligation. "A mistake," I repeated. "You would call abandoning someone in a dangerous neighborhood, without money, without a phone, just a mistake." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. It was a moment of poor judgment. I was angry, and now— "Are you not angry anymore?" I asked. Brenda looked at Paul as if seeking support. He took her hand and turned to me. "Mum, we all make mistakes. Brenda already apologized. I'm sorry too. I should have defended you that night. I should have looked for you immediately. But I'm here now. We want you to come home." "To do what?" I asked. "To continue being your maid? To continue being invisible until you need me for something?" Paul seemed genuinely surprised. "You're not our maid, Mum." I looked at my son with a mixture of sadness and clarity I had never felt before. "I'm not." "Paul, when was the last time you asked me how I was? When was the last time we ate dinner together as a family, instead of me serving and eating alone in the kitchen? When was the last time you treated me like your mother, and not like someone who's there to make your life easier?" Paul lowered his gaze. His hands trembled slightly. I didn't realize you felt that way." "Why didn't you ever ask?" I replied. "Because it was easier not to see my pain. Because as long as I didn't complain, you could both keep pretending everything was fine." Brenda stood up abruptly. "Look, we already apologized. I don't know what else you want from us. If you don't want to come back, that's fine. But don't make us feel like monsters. We gave you a roof, food, everything you needed. And what did I give you? I asked, feeling something dark and powerful growing in my chest. I gave you my youth, raising Paul alone. I gave you my free labor, cleaning your house for years. I gave you my dignity every time I accepted your insults without responding. I gave you everything I had, and you took it as if it were your right. You're dramatic, Brenda said with disdain. Always so dramatic. Something broke inside me at that moment. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide. Get out. Now. Mom, Paul protested. Please don't do this. I looked at him with tears in my eyes, but with a firm voice. I love you, Paul. I will always love you because you are my son. But I will not go back to a house where they make me feel worthless. I will not be invisible again. If you want to have a relationship with me, it will be on my terms, with respect, with dignity, with real love. Or it won't be. Paul stood up slowly, his face showing something that might have been comprehension, or perhaps just defeat. Brenda was already at the door, clearly anxious to leave. Where are you going to live? Paul asked with a broken voice. Here, with my aunt. She needs me, and I need her. I have a place where I belong now, a place where I don't have to earn my right to exist every day. Paul nodded slowly. I understand. And I'm sorry, Mum. I really am sorry. I know, I said more softly. But feeling sorry isn't enough. You need to prove it, and that takes time. They left then, Paul walking slowly as if every step hurt him. Brenda hurried and annoyed. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling my whole body tremble. Mary came out of her room and approached. She hugged me without saying anything. I cried on her shoulder, not out of sadness, but relief. I had done it. I had set boundaries. I had chosen my dignity over their convenience. I'm proud of you, Mary whispered. I know how hard that was. The following months were a slow but constant healing. Paul called me every week, brief conversations at first, gradually becoming longer and deeper. He told me about his life, but he also started asking me about mine, truly listening to me. Brenda never called. According to Paul, she was resentful and refused to admit she had done anything wrong. Eventually, Paul moved out alone, leaving her. He told me he finally understood that his wife was not the person he thought she was, that he had been blind for years. Mary and I became inseparable. She introduced me to the foundation that helped elderly, abandoned women. I started volunteering there, sharing my story with other women who had lived through similar things. I discovered that my pain, that terrible thing I had carried for years, could become something useful. It could help others heal. A year after that night on the dark corner, Mary became ill. It was something I saw coming, she told me. My heart was tired. The doctors gave her months, maybe weeks. Don't be afraid, she told me one night as I cared for her in her bed. I've lived a long life. I've known love and pain, and both were worth it. But the best thing of all is that in my last years, I found my sister. Not the sister I lost as a child, but the sister that fate gave me when I needed her most. I cried then, not for me but for her, for all she had suffered, and for all the wisdom she had gained through that suffering. Mary died 3 weeks later, peacefully, with my hand holding hers. In her will, she left everything as she had said. 50% to the foundation and 50% to me. $100,000 that were not just money, but freedom. The freedom to never depend on anyone again. The freedom to choose my own life. Lauren appeared at the funeral, but only briefly. She looked at me with hatred, but didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Her mother had died, and she would have to live with the knowledge that she wasted 15 years she could never get back. Paul also came to the funeral. He cried for real, not for Mary, whom he barely knew, but for me, for everything I had been through, for everything he hadn't seen until it was almost too late. Now, 2 years later, I live in a small but comfortable apartment near the foundation. Paul visits me every 2 weeks. Our relationship is not perfect, but it is real. There is respect, there are boundaries, there is genuine love. Sometimes I think about that night when Brenda left me on that dark corner, the night I thought was the end of everything, and I realized that it was actually the beginning of finding myself, the beginning of learning that self-love is not selfishness, but survival. Mary taught me that family is not defined by blood, but by respect and genuine presence. She taught me that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. She taught me that shared pain can become collective strength. Every week I visit her grave. I tell her about the women we've helped at the foundation, about the lives we've changed using her money and her story, about how her legacy continues to grow. And I always end by telling her the same thing. Thank you, sister, for finding me in my darkest moment, for showing me that light was still possible, because that's what she did. In the midst of my darkest night, when I thought there was no way out, a blind woman appeared who saw what no one else had seen, that I was worthwhile, that I deserved respect, that my story was not over. And she was right. My story was just beginning. Now I help other women write their own new beginnings. I tell them that it's never too late. That age doesn't mean they have to accept mistreatment, that they have the right to live with dignity until their last breath. Some believe me immediately, others need time, but they all eventually see the truth, that they are not the problem, that they don't have to shrink themselves to make space for others, that they can take up all the space they need and still be loved. This is my life now. It's not the life I imagined when I was young, but it is a life with purpose, with meaning, with peace, and that's more than I ever thought I would have. So to any woman who is reading this, who feels invisible, who believes that there is no hope left, you are wrong. There is always hope. There is always a path to the light. Sometimes that path begins in the darkest place, on a forgotten corner, on a cold night, at the moment when everything seems lost. But if you keep your eyes open, if you keep your heart willing, you will find your own Mary, your own guide, your own strength. And you will discover that all this time, the strength was within you. You just needed someone to remind you how to find it.